Hello everyone, I am going to present my Google Slides, and I also attached it just by itself without me doing the video. I'm hoping this will work as it's loading up. So I'm trying a new program that can allow me to record my voice because I'm going to be sharing some pictures of places I've been to, and it just, for me, is a lot easier to talk about it than just trying to write about it. So we are going to talk about the Second Continental Congress and meeting George Washington as well. I feel like this is a good place to start that. And you're going to be watching a Liberties Kids video where you're going to meet him there. And so we're going to kind of combine both topics just because there's not too much to talk about with Second Continental Congress. And I figured why not combine a few things. And your assignment will be actually finding facts about George Washington. So I'm hoping through this and through the Liberties Kids video and the links of the different websites I gave you, or just anywhere else you may know of that you would like to research, you're going to fill out, it looks like a Google slide. And it's a picture of George Washington, and you can fill it out yourself. Okay, so that's all that I want you to do. Well, I cannot take credit for these pictures, but I wanted to show you just some historical paintings. This is a painting of the Second Continental Congress when they were meeting, so I thought that was perfect. And then there's a picture of George Washington. Okay, so let's first talk about Second Continental Congress. By May of 1775, tension between Britain and America was rising. British troops were determined to arrest Patriot leaders and kill Minutemen who got in the way. And some of you may ask, well, what's a Minuteman, or what does that mean? Well, they're well-trained militia groups, and they were ready to fight in a minute. Pretty much what that is, Minuteman. And so, if you're curious what they looked like, they were really, they just looked like civilians, and of course they were armed. So I already showed you this picture when I was in Lexington on the green. That is a picture of what a Minuteman would look like. Ready to go. He's just wearing his normal clothes and has his musket ready to go. So they were ready to fight. And the redcoats, they were definitely swarming around Boston, which is where kind of everything was happening before that, right? Remember Paul Revere, he came from Boston and warned the people on the outskirts. So the Second Continental Congress needed to do something, and so they decided to convene, meaning that they met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the issues were not just about declaring independence anymore, because that was the first part, right? But these were the things that they needed to create. And so the two things that you can take away from the Second Continental Congress is that they created a continental army to defend the country from bloodshed. And George Washington was assigned to be the commander-in-chief. And so this is when we'll meet him next. And they also agreed to print money to pay for supplies. So they weren't relying on the British in the way that they used their currency. They decided to make their own. And that's how they were going to get supplies and what they needed. So it was a very important time. It wasn't just one meeting. It was, several. So I wanted to show you next, well, where did they meet? Now, they met in various locations. However, the big hot spot, where a lot of important things happened. However, let's talk about the Second Continental Congress, right? Where did they meet? Well, they met in Independence Hall. And they also called it the State House as well. But a lot of people are familiar with that. And again, it's in Philadelphia. I was there this last summer, and then I was there 10 years ago. And I've toured it both times, and it's still amazing, and I would do it over and over again. So this first picture is actually the group of teachers I was with that traveled. I think I'm right there in the back on the very end. Some teachers actually got cut off, unfortunately. So there were a lot of us. So fun. Teachers from all over the country. We came together and learned about history together so we can be better history teachers for you. And so that was our big group picture in front of Independence Hall. And so again, very important place where our founding fathers met. And so I highly recommend that you go tour it. And you also get to go inside, and they do allow you to take pictures in there, which is nice. So this is inside, and this is one of the important rooms, the assembly room. And this is where they would have met a lot of the time. And also this is where they met for future things that you will learn about as well. But yeah, it's a really neat room, and they tried to replicate it the way that it would have looked back then. They had to use candles, right? They didn't have electricity, and they, I believe, have some original items. I think this cane right here, they have said that's Benjamin Franklin's. This chair belonged to George Washington when he sat there, and has this sun on it if you look up close, but that was one of the original items in the room. But some things they had to replicate because it is pretty old, but they wanted to make it look like how they would have met back in those days, which is really, really cool. It's just really neat to be inside there, so you have to go. Who is George Washington? So let's lead into him. He is known as the father of our country. He was from Virginia and served as a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congresses. Congress unanimously chose him to be commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, which proved to be a good choice. And after a long battle, he finally forced General Cornwallis to surrender at Yorktown. We'll later learn about that. And Washington later was the leader over the Constitution and became the first president of the United States. So some of the pictures from my travels connected to George Washington. The first year that I ever did this Freedoms Foundation trip, we toured more of the southern colonies. We spent a lot of time in Virginia. And so we got to, on our last full day of traveling, we went to Mount Vernon, which is on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. This is where George Washington lived. There was no White House then. He didn't live there. He lived here. It was pretty beautiful, isn't it? I wasn't allowed to take pictures once I got inside. It was pretty high security, and we had this long line. We had to go in this way, and then we went through this door, and then we wrapped around. We got to go upstairs, and then we, of course, left and went downstairs and then left that way. So it was a pretty cool experience to be inside, and they have a museum there, and you could spend all day at Mount Vernon. I want to go back because I felt like I didn't have enough time. So definitely go there. And I think Mount Vernon has a virtual tour you can take. So I'm going to have to add that link for you guys to go and check it out so you can see it. Now the other thing was, this was a few summers ago, so when I went to Boston. And this is when I was in the Old North Church, and I was hearing this story about George Washington's bust, which they call these busts. And they would make them back then, because really all people could do were their portraits or this bust where it really replicates their face. And it looks very different than a lot of the other portraits they take of George Washington. But anyway, the tour guides that were telling me this, they said that General Lafayette, he was standing there, and so this is a little plaque next to it explaining what it says. But he went in 1824 because Lafayette was a lot younger than George Washington, so he lived longer. So after he had passed, he looked at that bust of Washington and said, yes, that is the man I knew, and more like him than any other portrait. So to him, and he saw him, he worked with him. They fought together, so he knows what his face looks like, because it's hard. We don't have pictures back then, right? No photographs. And he believed that that was his face. It's a true depiction of his face, which I thought was really neat. But anyway, this is inside the Old North Church. That's where Paul Revere, that's where the lanterns were hung for his bride. Really, really cool. So you definitely should check that out too. So those are just some interesting connections from my travels about George Washington. And there's a lot more you can learn about him, of course, but I highly recommend you check it out and research him and just have fun with it. All right. Hope you enjoyed that, and thanks for taking a listen.